Dr. Joseph White converted to the Catholic faith while in graduate school at Virginia Commonwealth University, where he received a PhD in clinical psychology. He later studied Catholic theology at St. Mary's University in San Antonio. Dr. White served as a parish director of faith formation for 2 years, and then worked 7 years as director of family counseling and family life for the Diocese of Austin, Texas. And he now works as director of catechetical resources for our Sunday Visitor, publishing and curriculum, and teaches courses in catechetical ministry, at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. Dr. White is amazing. We are so blessed in the Diocese of Trenton to have Dr. White here with us today. Now, like you, in your parishes, we have to think differently. We have to think, how do we get all this going? We did the same thing today. So Dr. White came to us virtually. So I thank you, Dr. White, for being here with us and coming in Zoom. He's Zooming with us, and he can kind of see you. We have the camera pointed, so he sees some of you. But Dr. White, I am going to pass it over to you, and let's all pray we have no technical connection problems. We'll manage them, though, if we have to, right, Dr. White?
That's right. Yeah, and along those lines, it's telling me right now that the host has disabled screen sharing. So something has to happen over there for me to share my screen. But while we're getting that situated, let me first say I'm thrilled to be able to be with you, even though it's virtual today. I was in Trenton a number of years ago and may have seen some of you in person back then. I've always wanted to come back. So I'm glad to come back virtually and maybe one of these days in person as well. I also want to say I'm always a little uneasy about following the bishop when I speak somewhere for a couple of reasons. Number one, bishops tend to be good speakers, and it sounds like you had a really great talk this morning. So maybe we should just end the day here. And no, I'm just kidding. Secondly, I'm never quite sure what the bishop is going to say. The bishop's in charge. So, and I had an experience, actually it was my first time doing a big talk out of state years ago. I guess it was in the year 2000, maybe. So now I'm dating myself a little bit. Right after I published my first book, which was called 7 Secrets of Successful Catechists. That's not in print anymore, but remember that title because that's key to the punchline of this story. So 7 Secrets of Successful Catechists was the name of the book. And so I was getting ready to go up and speak on the same title as the book, 7 Secrets of Successful Catechists. And the bishop said a few words and led the opening prayer. And this is a diocesan-wide catechetical conference. So there were a number of people there, catechists and catechetical leaders. And the bishop finishes his prayer with, and may we all remember the words of Mother Teresa, who said, God has not called us to be successful, but has called us to be faithful. And then just after that, the diocesan director for catechesis came up to introduce me, and I was going to be speaking on 7 secrets of successful catechists. So that was hard to get started after the bishop said God hasn't called us to be successful. But it sounds like you had a great homily from your bishop today, and I hope to kind of continue some of that reflection as we go forward this morning. Let me just see. Okay, now it's going to let me share my screen. Thank you for that. And we'll go ahead and get this up now. Okay, so this morning we're going to talk about chapter 4, which for me really is about accompanying those who accompany others. It's really about accompanying our catechists who are sharing the faith with others in their own formation. So how do we form catechists is the big question. And what I want to begin with are just a couple of questions for reflection. And we talked yesterday, Denise, about just kind of going around the room with the microphone just to hear, I'm a psychologist, and psychologists sometimes like to play games like word association, right? So when you hear the word formation, what word or words, phrases pop into your head? What comes to mind when you hear the word formation? Let's hear it.
All right, I'm walking around. What comes in? What comes to mind?
And one thing I know about New Jersey is that people usually are not shy to speak up. So please.
Shaping.
Shaping. Okay. What else?
To get in line.
Okay.
Growth.
Growth.
Modeling.
Modeling. I like that.
Think of human, spiritual, apostolic, pastoral, and intellectual.
It sounds like you've been spending some time in one of the documents.
College. Got a few more.
Sharing.
Sharing.
Sharing. I'm running all around the room, Dr. White. I'm coming. Change.
Change. Oh, I like that. Okay, let me move on now to this one. What comes to mind when you hear the word accompaniment? Because this is a word that's been used a lot recently, and especially by Pope Francis. So when you hear the word accompaniment, what do you think of?
Togetherness. Right. Befriending.
Befriending.
To walk with.
To walk with. I like that.
Listening.
Listening.
Discipleship.
Discipleship.
Gradualness.
Gradualness. Okay.
And more. Support.
Support.
Parents and family.
Parents and family. These are some great thoughts. I'm having a little trouble because the screen is so small on my screen. Did I cut somebody off there? Or are we good?
No, you're good, Dr. White.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure everybody got their say. So let's talk now a little bit, and I think that is a great introduction. Thank you for all your thoughts there, because I think these are all good kind of words to sit with and reflect on a little bit as we get into this topic. Here's what the new directory for catechesis says about the formation of catechists, and please bear with me here, because the Vatican is still working on getting some of this language a little more gender inclusive. So we're still talking about men and sons and brothers, but know that they mean that in a more inclusive sense. Formation is an ongoing process that, under the guidance of the Spirit and in the living womb of the Christian community, helps the baptized person to take shape. I like this, helps the baptized person to take shape, which means unveiling his or her deepest identity, which is that of being a son or daughter of God in profound communion with brothers and sisters. Okay, so formation is an ongoing process, a continual process, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit and in the living womb of the Christian community. So just sit with that for a second. Think about the implications of those three things. Ongoing process, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, in the living womb of the Christian community. And then what does formation do? It helps the baptized person to take shape, which means unveiling their deepest identity, that of being a child of God in profound communion with other children of God. Isn't that beautiful? The directory also says formation sets as its goal, in the first place, making catechists aware that as baptized persons, they are true missionary disciples. So in The Joy of the Gospel, Pope Francis talked about this, and he says, it's important that we realize that as baptized persons, we're not simply disciples, and we're not simply missionaries, but we are missionary disciples. We are following Jesus, we're walking in his way, and we're leading others to that way at the same time. We're missionary disciples. The formation of catechists, according to the Directory for Catechesis, helps to do two things: to develop the skills needed to communicate the faith, and also helps catechists begin to accompany others in their growth. So we're going to break that down into three dimensions in a few minutes, because the directory talks about three dimensions of catechist formation. We'll get there soon, but a few more words kind of in general about formation of catechists. So one of the things the directory talks about throughout, it's a thread that goes throughout the Directory for Catechesis, is that the community is the most important setting for formation, that we are formed as Christian people, as this prior slide said, in the living womb of the Christian community, right? So, Christianity and in particular Catholicism is not just a Jesus and me faith. It's a Jesus and us kind of faith, right? We are being formed in a communal experience of faith, and so our formation of catechists as well needs to be focused on this community context. The group of catechists is the real context in which each one can be continually evangelized and remain open to new formative contributions. So there's an evangelizing, and another kind of key theme that runs through the directory is this idea of evangelizing catechesis, right? So I think one of the things that this passage from the directory is saying is that when we form catechists together in groups, we allow for them to continually evangelize one another, and also to stay open to new contributions. So catechists begin to contribute to each other's formation as well. And they say, in my group, this is what we do to communicate this point. Somebody else says, oh, that's a great idea, I'm going to use that as well. There are a couple of aspects to that that I think are critical here as well. One is listening to the needs of persons, right? And so we want to help catechists develop their capacity to listen to the needs of persons. But in order to do that, we need to form them in a way that we are listening to their needs. We need to as we, somebody mentioned listening as being so key to accompaniment. If we want to accompany others in their formation, we have to listen to them and understand their needs. That there's an aspect of pastoral discernment here. We want certainly to form catechists that know how to discern what direction to go, what things to do, what things to say, where their learners are. And so we have to use pastoral discernment as we form them. There's concrete preparation. If we are asking catechists to be organized and prepared as they present the material that they're using with their learners and as they go through the catechetical year, we need to not be haphazard in the way that we prepare our catechists. We need to use that model, that concrete preparation that we want to see in them. And then implementation and evaluation of the pathways of faith. It's important that we be checking in and kind of evaluating, are people getting what we're hoping that they're getting, and are they able to use that? It's important in a catechetical setting with learners, and it's important in a formational setting with catechists as well. So the directory gives us in paragraph 135 several criteria for formation. And this is true for formation, like the points I just discussed, for formation that a catechist is doing with a group of learners, but also true when we're talking about formation of catechists. So a spirituality of mission and evangelization. We want to instill in our catechists this zeal for sharing the faith with others, for evangelizing others, and to really understand that this is their mission, that this is their call, being able to respond to that call of God. Catechesis as integral formation. So this part is important, and you'll see this come up again when we talk about the dimensions of catechist formation. But catechists are called to be all at the same time teachers, educators, and witnesses. So what's the difference between those things? Teachers and educators, we sometimes use those interchangeably, those two words. So let's dig into this a little bit. So if we go to the kind of the traditional meanings of these words, and I want to kind of zero in on the middle one there, educators. This word comes from a Greek word, educare, which means to draw forth that which is within. And so if we think of it that way, then we can understand, St. Augustine says, you have created us for yourself, O God, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. Right. So we all have this capacity for God that we are born with, that we're wired with, because God created us, and he created us for relationship with himself. And so we're all born with this capacity for God, this innate spirituality, certainly, clouded by original sin and all of those things, but that's within us. And it's within everyone that we form. And so one of the things we want to do for catechists is help them learn how to awaken that in their learner, how to draw out that which is within, educare. So they're called to be educators. They're also called to be teachers. One of the things that that we know, although we can know God from the things he created and by his movement in our daily life, there are a lot of things we don't know about God unless somebody hands it on to us. We have this rich and beautiful apostolic tradition, this history that we hand on, and this knowledge of God, and handing on that knowledge is that teaching function of catechists. And then finally, and equally important, catechists are witnesses, right? So one of the things that the prior directory, the GDC, said was that catechesis was an apprenticeship in the Christian life. An apprenticeship implies that you're walking beside somebody who already knows how to do this and is showing you how to do it. And it's important that catechists are not just talking about the faith, but are actually living out the faith and sharing the ways that they're living out the faith. So teachers, educators, and witnesses. Another criteria for formation mentioned in the directory is this style of accompaniment. And when I think of accompaniment, I really appreciated the person that said something like walking with the person, because that's kind of how I picture accompaniment, right? I think sometimes when we kind of want to teach somebody something about the faith, or we can sort of, especially if we think that they have a misconception and we kind of want to get them straight, it's almost as if we take the attitude of saying, hey, what are you doing way over there? Get over here with us. This is where you should be, right? Accompaniment takes a different approach. Accompaniment goes over to the person and meets them where they are and says, walk with me, let's discover this together, right? That's the style of accompaniment. The next criteria is consistency among formative styles. So this is kind of understanding what are the best practices, how do we do this? What are the tools that we need in our toolbox so that we know how to communicate the faith in the way that the church would want us to communicate it, and in a way that's consistent with how people grow and how people learn best and things like that. We'll talk about that in a few moments as well as we talk about the dimensions of formation. The next criteria is an attitude of dosibilitas. This is docility. And what that means is that we are docile to the Holy Spirit, that we look for the Spirit's guidance in our lives and we're ready to go wherever the Holy Spirit directs. So that docility to the Spirit, an attitude of self-formation. Somebody mentioned, I think Denise, you mentioned that the bishop said this morning, we can't hand on what we don't have. And I think, we hear that often, I think, in catechesis, but it's always important for us to come back to that and understand we really do have to form ourselves, and we need to be in continual formation. There's not a point where we say, okay, now I've mastered this, and so now I'm just going to hand it on to other people. No, we have to always have this attitude that there's more to learn, that there's a deeper level to reach with this. Openness to being touched by grace, to being touched by life, to being touched by persons. I think all of you who have been at this work for some time would probably have experiences that you can share where something happened, with a group of people you were forming or with a catechist that really helped you see things in a totally different way, in a new and deeper way. So we want to work with catechists on this and help them to know, to learn how to learn. And then finally, another criteria for formation is the dynamic of the laboratory in the context of the group, the directory says. This is learning by doing. So the dynamic of the laboratory is we're actually doing it. We're not just talking about it or thinking about it. It's not an academic exercise, but we're actually doing this. We're living out the Christian life, and we're reflecting on living out the Christian life in the context of the group, so that we're valuing the experience and the contributions and the formulations of each person. So now we've gotten to what I kept referring to, the dimensions of catechist formation. And these are discussed in detail in the directory in paragraphs 136 through 150. And I meant to mention to you, if Denise didn't, that I am going to share this PowerPoint with you so that you have these points all in an organized way. So don't worry about trying to get all of this down, but I do think it'd be great to note what paragraphs these are coming from in the directory, so that if you'd like to dig a little deeper and read it for yourself, I strongly encourage you to do that if you haven't already. So 3 dimensions of catechist formation in the new directory, and they are being and knowing how to be with, knowledge, both fidelity to the message and to the person. One of the things that the directory talks about a lot is this faithfulness to God and also faithfulness to humanity. And what does that mean? That means really learning about people. There's a whole chapter in the new directory that is focused on characteristics of people at different ages and stages of faith development. And what do we know about people at different ages and stages from the fields of education and psychology and sociology? How do people get along together in a community context at that age or stage? How do they think? How do they learn? The directory for catechesis points out the importance of knowing these things, right? There's a reason why when kids are being formed in 2nd grade and they're getting ready for First Communion and First Reconciliation, that we don't just hand them the catechism and say, hey, you know what, you ought to read, especially that section about the liturgy and the sacraments in the catechism, and everything you need to know is in there. There's a reason why we don't do that, right? For one thing, they wouldn't be able to read it. And even if they could, even if they're at a pretty high reading level and they can read it, would they be able to understand it the way they need to understand it, right? So we'd certainly have fidelity to the message there. Hey, it's the catechism. You can't argue with that. But there's no fidelity to the person. because we haven't really understood the developmental needs of that second grader, if that's the way we're operating. So the directory talks about the dual importance of fidelity to the message and fidelity to the person in the context. And then finally, the third dimension, savoir-faire, which are your methods and your pedagogy. And so it might seem murky now, the difference between fidelity to the person under the knowledge dimension and savoir-faire. So I'm going to hope to clear that up as we go along here, but let's kind of get into each of these dimensions one at a time. So the first dimension is being and knowing how to be with. And you'll find this in paragraphs 139 through 142 of the new directory. So this is the first area, the first dimension of catechist formation. The being side of this is supporting the catechist in two roles: witness of the faith and keeper of the memory of God, and focusing on the spirituality of the catechist. So how is the catechist embracing these roles as witness of the faith and keeper of the memory of God? Do I understand the promise, the hope which I am holding and carrying? And am I in touch with that? In this dimension, we want to work with catechists on their ability to pray. How do they converse with God? Do they understand prayer as a conversation with God? Their ability to discern. How do they listen for God in their daily lives? And what are some of their sources for discernment? Also, on the other side of this, the knowing how to be with side of this dimension, that relational capacity. Now, I think there are some things related to a person's ability to empathize and things like that, that are not easy to teach. I don't know another way to put that. So, you might have some catechists that are better at this than others. But I think one of the things that is helpful to us is just reflection on this. What do I understand about others? And also, very important is that respect for the dignity of others. And in fact, the knowing how to be with side, even some of those child protection trainings and things, I don't know if you do virtues training or something else in the Diocese of Trenton, our work with catechists on, certifying them in our child protection plan and those conversations about the dignity of others and respect for vulnerable persons and boundaries with others. Boundaries are an important part of knowing how to be with. So all of this is part of this dimension of catechist formation. So when you're implementing those diocesan requirements related to ethics and integrity in ministry and protection of vulnerable persons and things like that, you are developing one of these dimensions of catechist formation, this knowing how to be with dimension. Second is that knowledge dimension. Now, I think very often when we think of catechist formation, we go straight here to the knowledge dimension. And this is important because we can't hand on what we don't know. We can't live what we don't know, right? Knowing it is not enough, but we also can't hand on or live what we don't know. So it's essential too. So let's kind of dive into this fidelity to the message and fidelity to humanity. So our fidelity to God and our fidelity to the message, that involves becoming acquainted with and understanding, at least in general. I mean, our catechists aren't always going to get degrees in theology or things like that, but understanding in general, the story of salvation history, the way in which God made covenants with his people and fulfilled those covenants throughout our history. Understanding the Old Testament and the New Testament, the relationship with each other, kind of an overview of church history. I think all of those things, at least a general sense of that is important. The essential core of the Christian message, the creed, liturgy and sacraments, the moral life, prayer. So understanding those 4 pillars of the catechism at some level, is foundational for the catechist and handing on those teachings. And understanding the teachings of the magisterium of the church regarding the proclamation of the gospel and catechesis. So, knowing some key points from the directory for catechesis is important for catechists. What does the church say about handing on this message? What are the tasks of catechesis? If a catechist doesn't know the tasks of catechesis, how is that catechist going to make sure that they're keeping all of those in mind and all of those in balance? How do we prevent a catechist focusing exclusively on knowledge of the faith and never teaching their learners how to pray, if we can't kind of give them a sense of, hey, all of these things are important. We need to focus on all these tasks of catechesis. And then on the side of fidelity to humanity, it's interesting that the directory makes these points, and I think it's important that the directory does. So respect for the autonomy of the sciences, which this is that understanding that we have through the human sciences, like education, psychology, child development, sociology. We've learned some things about people and how they grow and how they think and how they learn. And it's important for us to understand this is a unique contribution to catechesis. What happens if we use that body of knowledge to teach math and reading and science and all of the other things that we teach, but we don't use that body of knowledge, all the things that we know about how people grow and how they learn best, we don't use it for teaching the faith? Well, what happens is we teach the faith less effectively than we teach all those other things, right? And that would be really sad. So, we need to use the best of what we know about how people grow and think and learn in our teaching of the faith as well. Discernment and evaluation of scientific theories to appreciate value and realize limitations. And then to incorporate the human sciences in a perspective of the faith and a human anthropology. So use that in understanding, how do people grow in faith? So here on the knowledge side, we're still kind of in the theoretical. So I told you I would kind of help you differentiate between what's the difference between the fidelity to humanity part of this and then the methodology and the pedagogy in that third dimension of catechesis. So the knowledge side is exactly what it says, knowledge. So what do catechists know about the faith, about the key topics of the faith? And then what do catechists know about how people grow and develop and change and what their needs are? Then we're going to use that as a tool in the third dimension. Okay, so we're going to use that knowledge to implement this third dimension of catechist formation, which is savoir-faire. This is French for know-how, basically, know-how, knowing how to do. So savoir-faire is pedagogical and methodological formation. So now that we know how people grow and develop in the faith, now that we know those key topics of the faith, what little tips and methods and techniques do we use for that? What is our pedagogy and what is our methodology? So these are the points that the directory makes about savoir-faire. That there needs to be this capacity of inner freedom and gratuitousness to be a credible witness, that catechists need to feel free to go with the flow, to feel confident enough to go with the flow. I have enough tricks up my sleeve that if it goes in this direction, I can still go with that. And I can't say, oh no, we're doing this way. Excuse me. Expertise in communication and narration of the faith. Excuse me. We have to be good storytellers as catechists, and we have to have a lot of different storytelling techniques because our faith is a faith of story handed on. And it has been ever since our Jewish ancestors, right? So understanding how to narrate that faith and how to communicate that faith in ways that people can hear it and understand, not just the stories of our faith, but also the key doctrines of our faith. Maturation of an educational mentality. fostering activation of learning processes. So an educational mentality, remember, drawing out that which is within. Capacity to guide group dynamics. So how do we use the group as a tool? And in the methodology chapter of the directory, which I believe is chapter 8, don't quote me on that, but I think it is. In that methodology chapter, the group is actually mentioned as a method in catechesis. So we need to be thinking strategically of, we're not, if we have 10 people in front of us, we're not just teaching 10 individuals. We are working with a group, and the group is also a tool in that process. Another part of savoir-faire is serene handling of educational relationships and their affective capacity. So understanding that the way that I learn and the extent to which I learn is in part, at least, related to the relationship that I have with the person who's forming me, right? So that relationship is important. And so it's the ability to use what we developed in that first dimension of catechesis, that knowing how to be and how to be with, being able to use that now in particular methodologies. And then finally, the capacity to prepare an itinerary of faith that considers sociocultural circumstances, uses language, tools, and techniques with creativity to make an assessment. So being able to make lesson plans and kind of schedule the topics across the year, and know, how am I going to introduce each topic, and how am I going to use multisensory methods in order to lay that out. I think very often people tend to kind of fall into different camps when it comes to catechist formation, over focus on one dimension or another. And so I really appreciate that the directory has laid it out this way and has presented these as 3 equal and separate dimensions, because the spirituality of the catechist and the ability to connect with others is very important. The knowledge of the faith and knowledge of how people grow and develop is very important. And also the methodology, all those tips and tricks and tools and multisensory methods that we use are very important. These are 3 separate dimensions, 3 capacities that we want to grow in our catechist. And if we ignore one or the other, then we're going to have deficits in that catechetical process itself. These 3 dimensions are related to the identity of the catechist as well. So in the chapter that precedes this in the directory on the catechist, there are some points made about what is the identity of the catechist, what is the I almost don't want to say role, because that makes it sound like the catechist is only what they do, but there's an identity here. The catechist is a witness of faith and a keeper of the memory of God. And that's connected with the being and knowing how to be with dimension. The catechist is a teacher and a mystagogue. So, one who's is imparting knowledge, and also one who is drawing the learner into the mystery, right? And that's connected with the knowledge dimension of catechist formation. That's how we develop the capacity to be a teacher and a mystagogue. And then one who accompanies and is an educator. They're walking along beside the person and educating them, guiding them through that process and drawing out that which is within. That's the savoir-faire, the know-how. So as we develop these dimensions of catechist formation, we're also developing that identity of the catechist as well. It's all connected. So what I'd like to do now is spend a good amount of time in your small groups talking about each one of these 3 questions, which are also multi-part questions. So again, we're going to take some time to do this. I'm thinking this discussion may in fact be 20 to 30 minutes long. I'll check in with you after 20 and see where we are, but I want to make sure that we get around the tables and get to each one of these. And then we're going to regroup and talk about each one of these questions and what was discussed in your groups. So 3 questions for discussion that are multi-part questions. First, in terms of forming others for the ministry of catechesis, where do I sense in myself areas of uncertainty or of nervousness? Am I open to be formed? How might I practically take steps to find this formation? This, I think, speaks to some of the points that it sounds like the bishop made in his homily this morning, and also our need to continue forming ourselves if we're going to form others. And secondly, in what area or areas of formation do I see the greatest need for growth in my catechist? So what is my assessment of that right now? Those 3 dimensions, where do they seem to need the most? Is it in being with God and others? Is it in knowledge? Is it in knowing the craft of catechesis, of how to hand on the faith to others? Maybe it's more than one of those things. What resources and activities might assist me in helping catechists grow in these areas? And then finally, what implications might our hectic and polarized culture have for the needs for formation on being with God and others? It's very hard to really learn about and reflect on being and being with if we don't give ourselves the time and the space to do that. So let's talk about each of these in your small groups. I'm going to check back in with you in about 20 minutes. I think our discussions may go closer to 30 minutes because there's a lot to unpack here. And then we will, at about probably 11:30 or so, reconnect. And I want to hear, you may want to appoint somebody as the note taker in your group, because I'd love to hear some of the thoughts that you had about each of these questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. White. I just wanted to mention to everybody, the questions are in your folder. So they're laid out in your folder so you can take them out. That might help in your discussion. And like Dr. White said, we'll have hopefully representatives from the table. So try and get one person from the table who wants to share to the whole group. I don't know if we can hear from everybody, but we'd love to hear from most of you. So thank you, Dr. White.
All right.
All right, my friends. I gave you your little 5-minute warning. We like to talk, right? As Dr. White said, in New Jersey, we like to chat. And it's just years for the conversation. Everybody told me there wasn't enough time for fellowship, so we're going to give you a full hour for lunch. Have time for your fellowship. That was always a concern. But we're back. So Dr. White, I'm going to pass it on to you. You have some words, and then we'll bring up some guests.
Great. Yeah, it's I'm anxious to hear some of the things that you discussed during that discussion time there. So I'm wondering if, and we don't necessarily have to go through the questions in order or anything like that. I'm most interested just to hear about what stood out to you in your group. What were some of the points made that struck you in particular? So I wonder if we can get some folks queued up, maybe to come up to the mic and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, we'll try and have a couple of table representatives and you can be my filter. Gotcha.
So good morning, everyone. It's so funny, when we looked at the first question, actually none of those, a certain nervousness, time. Our main factor in life is the sense of time, and the extra time that even COVID has made even scarcer with more duties, more things, and the sense of that balance of our lives that we don't want to feel like we're burdening our catechists by having to come to something, or we're burdening them by asking them to offering. Because we didn't even realize, like, every August, all of our prayer lives turn to, like, we just as you're running. And I can't even tell you the last time I was on a retreat, I had them for COVID. And there's that sense of prayer and time. Like my grandmother used to say, if the devil can't make you sin, he'll just make you busy. And you'll be so busy, you won't notice God anymore. And we're so busy with our programs, sometimes we don't. So we're not uncertain, we're nervous, we're not have plenty of resources, the diocese is like providing, it's just believing that should take time out of our catechist lives, very busy lives, to come to something. And the areas of information, you said all. When we look at them, that's why you have to know your catechist. That's why there has to be time to not just be subbing constantly or doing constantly or get out of your office and walk around the school, listen outside the door, talk to a catechist. What is their concern? Are they burned out in 7th graders, compliant 3rd graders? Like what's the deal? Like, is it a switch off? Do I need a new ministry? I have 2 people, I moved them over to Consolation. They're just done with kids right now. Kids are lovely, but they're especially if you're like a 65, 70-year-old who has like only your grandchildren as your base. It's hard to keep doing it. So it's that sense of individual we look at it. What resources, there's so much out there. There's virtual, there's all sorts of things, there's books, programs, there's all of our reps would be more than happy. But there's so much, it's just narrowing it down, making it purposeful, and trying to have that individual relationship. If we're going to accompany our catechists, it's not the same. Do they need you don't have to have a degree in theology, which kind of brings us to the last thing. When it comes to formation and trying to get them, because that's the time of year. Half the people who aren't here are not here because you're still hunting for people to teach their classes, or they're running around and everyone to register. And one of the things is God is I am, right? To be God is being. God is not a do. He never said I do. He is I am. And I am is just to be. So the gift of being is enough. And my catechists are burned out because they feel the families aren't unfaithful. So they get, I had 3 catechists that I can't look at another class of kids just not going to church, not care, parents not caring. I said, but you're it. Like that's your ministry. You're the voice. You might be the only person. But in our modern world, it's so polar that CCD might be the only public place they're talking about their faith outside the house. Because God's not mentioned at school, it's like, this is it. So this is a real witness. That course would be when we're trying to attract them is important. That's the most godlike thing. It's just to be there. Everything else God will help you with. So that's what we were talking about. Time.
Thank you, Eileen.
I heard a lot of great points in there. I think the time thing was one of the things that really struck me. And as I think about that and think about formation of catechists and time, I also think about how sometimes the time that we take with catechists and formation is spent doing things that we might find we could do individually and use the group for the things that work best for the group, right? So, or the things that maybe are key and important that we forget when we're trying to kind of check off the list and make sure we cover this content or do this methodology. And so I'm just wondering if there are some creative approaches to that will enable us to gather as a group with catechists for those moments that would be most important in a group setting. Does that make sense?
Yes, they're nodding.
Yeah. Let's hear from one of the other tables.
Volunteer for the table? Yeah, why not? I'm gonna get some people on this side. This for the tall people? Yeah, nice and loud though.
Okay. Oh, don't worry about that. Okay, we had a really lovely group over there. What is it, Our Lady of Fatima visitation. So I think that we concentrated mostly on that first question. In terms of forming others for the ministry of catechesis, where do we sense moments of uncertainty, nervousness? Are we open to be formed, and how might we practically take steps for formation? And I think what happens in a group is you want to start with all the good stuff, like, oh, this is why I committed, or this is what I'm looking forward to. And I think that these questions kind of bring us down to the things that are wrong, or the things that we're not sure about, the things that we maybe even secretly don't tell anybody we're scared of. So I think what we talked about is, one thing is the catechist training. I know that all of you probably are suffering for catechists. Not only have we lost, people from our parishes with this pandemic, but we have lost our volunteers. And for me, I never had a problem finding catechists. This is the first year that I actually am having some difficulty doing that. The other catechists have not come back. And I know that when I look at what the training is, now I never had a problem training them because it was just two things, but these things look really like you want them to have a college degree. So I don't know how, if anybody has any suggestions, how we take this and, incite our catechists to do this training. Also, in our group, what we talked about is we can get the volunteers, we get them to come out, but when we begin to tell them what the training that is involved, we're a little apprehensive about saying to them, okay, we're gonna have to take 8 weeks of this and 6 weeks of that, and then also we have some uncertainty about the upcoming season. We've just come out of, this nightmare of the virtual, and now we're there in person with them. How's it going to be? Are we going to have to wear the mask? Are they going to have to wear the mask? Or, what is all going on with that? And then our teaching strategies also, they have to change a little bit, don't they? And I love this. I don't know who said this in our group, but Jesus didn't ask for his apostles for a doctorate. And I don't think he's asking our catechists for that either. And then also, not only are we short of catechists, but we're short of registrants too, aren't we? Our religious education programs have been, cut in half or even more. And then a simple thing I think that they think about is, will these children attend Mass? Will their parents bring them to church? What type of system do we have to see that they're there? They may not understand it fully. They may not really grasp everything that the Mass is about, but how are we going to know they're there? If they're there, they're getting something. They're at least being able to say their prayers. They're at least hearing the gospel. They're at least hearing the homilies. So it's a little, because with the population that we have now, they're not bringing their children to church. They work on the weekends, so they're not there for Sunday Mass. So are we going to introduce a Mass during the week where they can attend? And then sports, of course, this has always been a problem with the sports. Some coaches understand that faith is important, but others do not. And so I think that knowing those things, I don't think it's a bad thing, because I think it's something that we can work on, and that we can get together, put our heads together and figure out how we're going to proceed forward with this. And knowing, this is the thing that always keeps me, is that this is not my ministry. This is God's, and he's going to provide the means for how we take care of all of those things. Sometimes poorly, but hopefully always with a big heart, and always just wanting to evangelize our children and our adults.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you for all of that. I want to offer a couple of words that I think you made some great points there, and I want to encourage those who are struggling with those dimensions of catechist formation to think of catechist formation a little differently. One of the points that we talked about even going back to the prior GDC, is that formation is a continual process, right? And so we want to model that with our catechists, because that's what we want catechesis to be, a continual process. So when we look at those dimensions of catechist formation, these are not all of the things that have to be done and completed and catechists have to be fully formed in before they can start their work as catechists, right? These are areas, these are dimensions that we want to continually give our catechists some additional formation in over the course of their ministry. Does that make sense? So you might decide that some things are prerequisites. Certainly, certification in the child protection program of the diocese is a prerequisite, I think, in every diocese in the United States. Those kinds of things they have to do up front. There might be other aspects that you feel like we need to kind of at least do an overview of a couple of Catholicism 101 that sometimes people chronically get wrong, that I've noticed as a catechetical leader, that we want to just kind of make sure folks have a good handle on going in. But don't get the idea that what the church is asking of you is that everybody receive a degree going in as a catechist, that we have to have a theology degree in order to begin that work. On the other side of that, though, I also want to say this. One of the principles that we have in psychology with regard to whether people value a role that they're in or value work that they're doing is that people will value something more if they invest in it. And I think sometimes in our effort to get catechists to actually get, warm bodies in the room with groups of children and others that we want to form, we're tempted to say things like, anybody can do this. You'll have everything that you need. You don't have to have any experience or expertise, please, because we just want to get anybody in there so that we can fill those ratios. The problem with doing that is that if anybody can do it, why do I need to do it? Right? And so one of the things that I would encourage you to do is really help people in your discern this as a call. And I think Pope Francis has given us some great opportunities to do that in a new way with this new motu proprio. If you want to kind of just have a crash course on the key points of the motu proprio, I have a 12-minute video on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, that I'll give you the address for later. It might give you some talking points as you kind of continue that call to recruit some additional catechists. We really want them to discern this as a call and to realize, hey, we don't want just anybody. We want somebody who's really called to this ministry. And also, we're going to ask people to invest in their development as catechists, because this is an important ministry. Now, the good thing about that is that once people have invested in that formation, once they've given some of their time to get formed and ready, and they're continuing to give of their time to form themselves over the course of that ministry, the more investment they have, the less comfortable they feel just walking away. Even if they get frustrated, or even if they start to feel a little burned out, they also think about, well, but I've worked so hard at this, I've put so much into this, and I don't want to just walk away from it. And so it's a balance, right? It's a balance of helping people understand, if you have the call to this and you don't have a degree in theology, that's okay. We're going to give you the formation that you need, but also helping people understand that it is a call and it is something that is important enough to invest in. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. White.
Yeah, I just want to comment as well. We definitely don't want, we would love everybody to have a master's, a doctorate, a degree in religion and theology, but that's not the reality of life. We want catechists to share their faith, and they can't share what they don't have. So we're looking at these questions to unpack, to say, what do we need to provide our catechists? And just listening to some of the comments, we can't be fearful for inviting our catechists, because when we think we're going to burden someone, we're missing out on an opportunity that we could bring them along the journey of formation. So we'll talk a little bit about this afternoon as well. But I want to hear from more tables. Don't be shy.
I know a lot of you out there. Can I
Yeah,
get?
Denise, if I can add to that for a second, I think what you just said was important. And I think, think about if people are having hectic, kind of busy, packed lives, what you might be able to add to that life by giving them some opportunity to reflect, to dive deeper into their spiritual life and find that balance, to have a group of fellow catechists that support them in that spiritual life. I mean, I think the more hectic and stressful our lives are, the more we need those kinds of things in our lives too.
That's right. I have someone, Dr. White. Very,
Great.
very our good friend.
Okay, at our table, we felt that every one of these things was interconnected. You couldn't discuss one without discussing the other. And so really, the last one is actually the pertinent one about our hectic and polarized culture. And we were talking about all these different things, and we felt that, of course, we're open to be informed, because here we are, So what we do as, pretty much as a group is just let our volunteers know that we are still being informed by saying, oh, I went to this thing, and sharing information and giving out, like, the pandemic actually helped me with this because I established more social media contact. And like for Labor Day, I put on our Facebook page a link to Rerum Novarum, how the church feels about labor and the dignity of the worker, and doing things like that to show people. And it's not about having a theology agreed. So we always tell our volunteers when they say, oh, I don't know whether I can do this. I feel like I want to, but I don't know enough. And the answers are in the book. It's about being a faithful person and demonstrating that you care about children's faith. So that's kind of the whole discussion we had about trying to squeeze things in and show them that even though we're busy, because we're all involved, especially since the pandemic, in so many different ministries and things to do, that if we show, we're modeling it, we're accompanying them, we're showing them that this can be done, and you don't have to do it all in one day. I've been taking courses and reading things for 40 years now. And I don't feel like I'm informed. So, and it's about being at mass with people. And if they say, oh, I'm too busy, say, well, thank goodness we have a live stream now. So let's talk about the homily next week after you watch the live stream. So, there's ways to do it without, and also about, finding out about people, because that was the confidence thing. We were just talking about how difficult it is sometimes to inquire about a person's personal life to see whether they're in full communion with the church and whether they're, able to volunteer. And it's sort of like, it's how you say no. That maybe it's like, oh, we can't accept it right now because of this, but maybe we could work on this together. So that's what we were talking about, the whole idea of journeying together, rather than these are the rules, this is what we have to do.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Very good. Yeah, I think that emphasis on journeying together is very important. And I think, one of the things kind of connected with that is, instead of putting pressure on catechists and saying, well, these are the 10 courses that you have to attend, or things like that. I mean, I know that we have the requirements with regard to child protection, of course, and things, but beyond that, that invitation, that accompaniment, that walking with, that providing those resources and having those personal conversations and saying, hey, have you checked this out? I wonder if this would be helpful for you, or, what kinds of things are you needing that that you feel like would round out your formation as a catechist, and taking that motivational stance with them.
All right, I think we have another group that wants to
Great.
share. Just grabbed all these beautiful people went through a leadership class.
That we ran for 2 years, and I went over and I'm like, who's speaking with this table? So we got
Danielle, thank you. So Danielle.
I think our biggest concern was that we haven't been face to face with our catechists for like 2 years now, and we don't know where they are, where their faith is, what they're ready to communicate with our students. So we were trying to say, how do we do it diplomatically to set the tone for these catechists that we're here for them, but yet we want to observe what they're doing. So Kathy had a great idea. She said, it's not just the negative feedback. We're walking around and observing and saying, oh, that's a great idea. I never thought to do it that way. Can I share with my other catechists? So kind of monitoring it in a way that we can use it to our advantage, but then also kind of, the bishop said, which gives me chills when I think about it. I had a catechist one year say that the Eucharist is just a symbol. And I just was like, and I just had to approach it in a different way and say, that's not what we teach. And that's my concern, that I'll have catechists that saw that and say, oh, this is where we are. So basically monitoring and just kind of knowing that we are there to help them form their faith. If they can't answer a question, come to us, and maybe we can give you a direction to go instead of just doing it off the cuff.
Thank you, Danielle.
And as those catechists are forming their faith and as they still have some of those questions, reassure them that when kids ask a tough question, it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, hey, that's a good question. Let me do a little research on that. Let me come back to you about that. That's much better than giving a quick answer that might not actually represent what the church teaches on it. So, and I think we're getting more and more into some of the weeds on that as our church teaching diverges more and more with certain social issues in our culture. So kids come with kind of how they've been formed by popular culture and struggle with some teachings of the Catholic Church. And sometimes, that's the fear that people have of being catechists, especially for middle school and high school. It's like, whoa, I don't want to, I wouldn't know how to navigate those kinds of things. And I think that reassurance that, hey, it's okay to say, I don't know, and let me do a little research. It's okay to bring in a guest. You want me to come into the class and work with that and help try to answer some of those questions, or have father or deacon or somebody else, director of social concerns, social ministry in the parish, address some of the Catholic social teaching issues. I think it's important for us to feel like resources to one another as a community as well.
Yeah, and I just want to comment too on Danielle. I think what she was giving us was we have to get to know our catechists. We need to get to know who our teams are and walk with them and continually provide them opportunities for that continued formation to reach all the dimensions that were laid out this morning and our director. So thank you, Danielle. Mark.
I can't keep my mouth shut. A couple of things have been said, and we touched on it in our group, but not in this way, but I was thinking about it. There are formal ways of formation, and then there are informal ways of formation. And sometimes the informal ways of formation are the doorway through which more formal formation opportunities can be made available. So for instance, Denise was talking about sending us, bits of the bishop's homily. That's a formation opportunity. Dr. White mentioned his YouTube channel. Send the link to your catechists. That's an informal formation opportunity, and maybe one or two of them, like we talked about in our group, we're planting seeds in the classroom with our children, and we'll water and do what we can to make that plant grow, but really it's not us that's doing it, it's the Holy Spirit. And so we're planting the seeds. We have to do the same thing with our catechists sometimes. Is plant the seed of how important ongoing formation is and can be to create the context in which they can better tell their own stories of faith. So, if we provide informal opportunities for formation, encourage them to read the Monitor. There's great stuff in the Monitor every month. Reflections on sacred scripture, about living the life of faith. Encourage them to do that. And maybe it spurs the question or an aha moment of where can I go to learn more about that? And that's when they come to you and say, how can I find out more about this particular issue or item in our faith that I want to learn more about? And that's when we can start to gently direct them into more formal formation.
Great points there. Great points there. I want to give you an additional resource for informal formation that is brand new, and I think it's something you'll really love, and it's free, which is always great, right? That fits your budget. There is a brand new initiative from OSV and I mention it was free? And it's called Real Plus True. And let me let you see this website. I'm just gonna put it up here. Okay, so what Real Plus True is, it's directed in particular towards millennial and Generation X adults, but it's something that we can also use for catechist formation, because what we're doing here with Real Plus True is we're going to go through all 4 pillars of the catechism, and every month 4 6-minute videos, so bite-sized 6-minute videos that go through the 4 pillars of the catechism. And we're trying to model good catechesis here with this. And so the first video is always called the proclamation video. What this is going to do is it's just going to kind of grab something from everyday life experience that will help get people into this topic, right? So in this first unit, we're talking about God's plan for our lives and the way that we can discover that through church teaching. So the first video is on what would the earth be like without maps, and what's the purpose of maps, and why is it so important to us? These videos are styled by professional animators. I mean, they're super high budget, really slick deals, styled in the style of Vox, if you like Vox videos. A lot of the sound is kind of like Radiolab, if you've ever heard that on NPR, but designed to be really appealing to this particular demographic. So you have the proclamation video, and then you have the explanation video, which gets more into the truths of the faith. Again, 6 minutes, animated, very engaging. I think you'll love it when you see it. These are all free. The connection video is the how do we connect that now with everyday life? If you're familiar, if any of you use the Alive in Christ program for kids, you know that our model is invite, discover, live. And this is in the same sense, invite, discover, live. Proclamation is like the invitation. The discover is like the explanation, and then the live is the connection. There are going to be 3 videos every month. We're going to do 12 months for each of the pillars of the catechism. So in 4 years, we'll have, let's see, what does that make? 96 times 2, almost 200 videos, 6 minutes long, covering all 4 pillars of the catechism. But these are free videos that you can send your catechist a link to every month, and within 4 years they're going to cover the catechism completely. Rather than having classes where you're kind of gathering people for an hour lecture on some aspect of the catechism, why not use some informal stuff where you're just kind of sending out this video? Hey, here's a new thing for us to kind of take a look at and discuss this month, and use those gathering points to actually use the group setting, or actually delve into spirituality and stuff like that. So the knowledge content hopefully will be covered in something like this. And again, I don't know if I mentioned, they're free. So please take advantage of this. You'll find this at realtrue.org, realtrue.org, realtrue.org. I think you'll really, really like them. A couple other things I want to share with you, because I know that we're pretty much out of time here. Let me just share this. Let's see how I need to do this here. Okay, here we go. So my YouTube channel is bit.ly/Dr. Joseph White YouTube. bit.ly/Dr. Joseph White YouTube. I'm on Twitter at @JosephOSV. So when I have a new video or something new happens in catechesis, I always post a notice there. Facebook is bit.ly/FB Joseph White. I tend to post the similar things on Facebook and Twitter, and my website is sharingcatholicfaith.com. If you need some resources for the Directory for Catechesis, we have a little magazine-style catechist guide to the Directory for Catechesis. So for that dimension where we're trying to help people understand what does the church say about catechesis, maybe you'll get some of your catechists to read the whole directory. That would be great. But I don't know how many of them will read the whole thing. But if you want them to just kind of have a bite-sized overview of that, the Catechist Guide to the Directory for Catechesis is a nice little magazine style, inexpensive way to do that. For those who want to get a little more into it, the companion to the Directory for Catechesis is kind of something that walks alongside the directory and gives an interpretation of what's there and some resources and questions for reflection. I think I'm out of time, so I'm going to turn this over to Denise and the folks over there for your next step here. I'm assuming you're going to have lunch pretty soon, so I hope everybody has a good lunch. And thank you so much for letting me be with you today.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. White. Your daughter's first day of school and you were running too, so we hope that all went well, and we're going to invite you back. Not the first time. And we'll get your PowerPoint, right?
Yes, yeah, I'll send that to you.
You'll be getting them in the PowerPoint. Right, thank you so much.
Thank you.